Let me welcome you very warmly indeed to Christ Church. Thank you so much for giving up the evening to be with us. From time to time, we put on events like this where we can come away from the busyness of life, gather together and consider the big questions. And I guess there is no bigger question than how we can face death with hope. Death is unsettling. It reminds us of our own mortality. Death is awful. It separates us from those we love. And so the fear of death can leave us, even if we're pretty stoical individuals, rather quivering like jellies, especially when it's the death of a loved one. And I guess that's why it remains one of the last taboo subjects in our culture. People don't like talking about death. And even though we're going to be discussing it this evening, we don't want to minimize the pain and the suffering that goes with that subject. But we do want to provide an opportunity to consider how we can face death with confidence, with peace, with hope. And we're really grateful to Jeremy Marshall for joining us this evening to help us to do that. So Jeremy, come up and join me. Let me introduce Jeremy to you. Jeremy is married to the lovely Jeanette. He has 3 grown-up children and he lives in sunny Sevenoaks. Although he would probably say at times he feels like he lives down the road at the Royal Marsden, he actually does live in Sevenoaks most of the time. I was thinking this morning, what would Jeremy want us to know about him? I think he'd want us to know that he's a passionate supporter of Watford Football Club, and no doubt has been much rejoicing in their recent run of good form. He has been at various times in a banking career chief exec of Credit Suisse, and more recently...
Not Credit Suisse, no. The UK bit.
The private bank,
UK bit,
but of the private bank.
Chief bottle washer.
Chief bottle washer at Credit Suisse, and chief exec of the long-standing family bank, Hoare and Co. All that changed 5 years ago when Jeremy was diagnosed with cancer, and 3 years ago he was confronted with the news that he had about 18 months left to live. So it is a joy to have you with us, Jeremy, still. I hope you can see why he's a great person to help us consider this question this evening. I'm going to interview Jeremy for 20 minutes or so. As I do so, you'll find there are question slips in your pews. Why not scribble down your own questions? Because then what will happen magically is that somebody will come along and top up your drinks, offer you some food, and then we'll have 20-25 minutes of Q&A where you can ask Jeremy any question. He says he's happy to talk about anything, private banking, Watford and their wonderful season, but you might want to ask other questions. So Jeremy, let's get to know you a little bit. You've been a private banker. You're a private banker for a long time. What does it take to make a successful private banker?
That's a good question. Discretion is certainly an important quality. The ability, I think, to get along with all kinds of different people. I mean, rich people are the same as everybody else. They just have... Am I doing something wrong?
I use that one instead.
Okay. Technical glitch. I guess it's the same in private banking as pretty much any walk of life, that people look for somewhere they can trust, they look for integrity, they look for good service. Those are the things. I'm not saying I had any of those, but anyway, we're talking about a theoretical model private banker.
And I remember meeting you several times when you were at Hoare and Co. And it's not too rude to say, you look like a kid in a candy store. You really enjoyed being in the building. You enjoyed being in the bank. You would always point out something of brilliantly interesting historical interest to me. Do you want to share something of your...
Yeah, it was an absolutely magical, wonderful place to work, and there's one or two people connected with it here this evening, so I'm very grateful for that opportunity. It was a dream job, and the family is so nice to work for. They're the most wonderful people, and the bank's owned by the 11th and 12th generations of the Hoare family, founded in 1672. It's been on the same site in Fleet Street since 1690, and packed full of history. And also an amazing, fascinating customer base. Just a real fun place to work. Tremendous. A bit different to Credit Suisse, which was, interesting as well. I was there for 20 years. I worked, I ran strategic planning at one point, and then ran some of the US business, and then back to the UK. And that was good fun as well. But that was a different, much more of a global firm, much more pressure to, push out products, which a few of you might have had a fun experience with. So, yeah, Hoare was my real favourite.
And I guess while you were in private banking in particular, you would have come across and worked with people who were very wealthy. And looking back on those experiences, people often say money makes the world go round, money solves all the problems, money makes me happy. Was that your experience?
I think, look, on average, is it better to be wealthy than living on a rubbish tip in Calcutta or something? Yes, of course it is. But being rich does not always make you happy. And I would say some of the most miserable people I've ever met are people who had a lot of wealth, and often that caused fractions and even hatred within the family. And I think one of the things that we can easily get wrong is to think that there's some kind of ladder of success, and if we climb the ladder, that then at the top there is happiness. And different people look for different ladders. Some people are not interested in money; they're looking for pleasure. Some people want power. Some people, different things. But a wise man once said, all careers end in failure. So each one of us, if we climb a ladder and think at the top we will find something that will really satisfy us, I don't think that's true. And a very wise man called Augustine, who some of you may have heard of, who was probably the most influential Christian thinker outside the Bible, said, God, you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until we find rest in you. So the Christian claim is actually we won't find happiness in money or power or pleasure. We're made for God, and we will only find pleasure and true satisfaction in knowing him.
Jeremy, let's move on if we can to the cancer. I can't imagine, and I've known you much longer than the 5 years, and you've been a good friend for all that time. I can't imagine what it's been like for you to go through the last 5 years. Are you happy to share something of the story of receiving the diagnosis, and then things seem to get better, and then it kind of came back?
Yeah, some of you I know have been through that, and I've nothing but sympathy, for those of you, because it is a terrible thing, cancer, and it's kind of the thing that we all fear, isn't it? So my, cancer story, and everybody's story is different. Started, about 5 years ago when I had a lump on my ribs. So I went to the GP, and they said, "Oh, it's nothing. It's fine. We'll just get it checked out." And then what happens, and some of you have been through this, is you just get referred from one person to another, and they say, "I don't know what that is. Go to another place, go to another place." Eventually they say, "Well, we're referring you to the Marstons." Even the dentist person like me knows, well, the Marston only does one thing, which is cancer. So when I first went there, about 5 years ago, they said, "Oh, it's fine. We caught this early. It's a rare type of cancer. Being a private banker, I don't want to have a common or garden one. I want to have something very rare and abstruse and complicated, so I can kind of boast about it to my friends." So anyway, the first type of cancer I had was polyfluorestic liposarcoma, which is a cancer of the muscle tissue. So I went through a few operations and also radiotherapy. I carried on working. And then after about 6-9 months, it's fine, we fixed it. Come in every 3 months for a checkup. And then even they said, come in every 6 months. So about a couple of years went by, and I thought it was fine. Then one day, about 3 years ago, I was at a friend's house. It was in the summer, and I went to just adjust my collar because it was hot, and I felt this massive lump on my collarbone. And I thought, oh no, I know what that is. And within 60 seconds, my world was kind of, upside down. And it's like being punched in the face, basically. It never recovered. So I said to Jeanette, "I've got to go home, I feel ill." I told her in the car, "Look, I found this lump." Went back to the hospital, and they told me, you've had it. You've got tumours everywhere. We don't know how we missed them, but we did. It turned out, actually, afterwards, it was a completely different type of cancer. So it's small cell lung cancer, if you're into cancer classifications. And I've got, I'll spare you the details, but tumours here, there, and everywhere. And the oncologist said, we can't cure you, and you've got 18 months to live. And that was sitting right next to Jeanette. I burst into tears. that's a pretty hard thing to be told, 18 months, even though, hey, it was wrong, I'm still here. So, if you read about a sort of health service crisis, and I must recommend my health insurer before I forget Bupa, which is amazing, by the way. If you go for any inferior ones, like AXA,
this evening is not sponsored by
dreadful.
Bupa.
No, Bupa's amazing, and it really does make a difference actually to have that. But so I've also had terrible problems with my eyes. So I was blind for a while. I had both eyes detached retina. At one point, I was like shuttling backwards and forwards between Guy St Thomas's and the Marsden on the tube, kind of half blind. My sisters, well, I've got 3 sisters, they're charming ladies, they're all sort of headmistresses, they're very bossy, and one of them said, I will take your arm and walk with you on the tube, but I want you to have a badge saying, this is my brother, not my husband. I said, oh, thanks a lot, that's charming, isn't it? Yeah.
I remember you saying you used to have an eye patch that made you think you were kind of, John Wayne or something like that.
Yeah, that's right, pirate, yeah. So, and then I've been through endless chemo, radiotherapy. I'm actually, believe it or not, in chemo now. So I've had 22 cycles of chemo. It's a pity the Marsden doesn't give you some kind of frequent flyer system, which rewards you, but there we are. And chemo is debilitating, and your hair falls out, but looking around, I can see some of the gentlemen are similarly follically challenged, so it's okay, it comes to us all. And it's debilitating, chemotherapy. So each time you go through it, you just feel tired. I had one on Monday, actually, we didn't really plan this way, but the timing is not bad because it gives you so many steroids. I mean, if there was a drugs test, I'd be like Ben Johnson. You just can't sleep because they give you that to help you absorb the chemicals, which are basically a form of poisoning. And there's 3 ways of treating cancer. You either cut it, burn it, or poison you. Probably in 20, 30 years, I'll look back and think it was kind of barbaric. But so chemo is tough. You're there at the Marsden all day. You're wired up to the drugs, and you just sit there and they pump it through you. You go home, the steroids kick in, and then around now, then they wear off, and then you start to feel really tired. So but it's better. Trust me, it's a lot better than the alternative.
Jeremy, can I just go back to that? Either 5 years ago, and I remember talking to you at the time, or 3 years ago, you love your wife and you love your kids. Are you happy? And you said you burst into tears. Are you happy to share something of just how hard it was to get that news for you, for Jeanette, for them?
Yeah, that's the hardest thing, I think. And I know some of you here have been through that, and I feel for you. The hardest thing is the impact it has on your loved ones, because it is a hammer blow. To have to tell your children, I'm going to be dead in 18 months, even though that was wrong, that's a really, really hard thing. And I'm a Christian, I'm going to talk about that, but I'm not some Superman or someone who just like goes from one to another. No, it's really, really, really hard to have cancer, and I wish I didn't have cancer, and I don't want to die. I mean, Paul in the Bible said, I don't really mind, for me to live is Christ, to die is gain. He obviously was a lot holier person than me. I would like to live, and I'm glad to live. So the hardest thing is the impact on, I would say my children are all now at university or through university, but especially on Jeanette. Yeah, because it makes just planning holidays almost impossible, because we've been several times on holiday, had to abort them and come back. It's hard for her with her career because she was or is a great mother, but then she decided she wanted to so she retrained, she became a therapist, and then it's hard to work as a therapist if you don't know, will my husband be around in a few months? So it's been tough, yeah.
You mentioned you were a Christian. You grew up in a clearly Christian family. We've talked about that many times. Just share a little bit about what it was like growing up in the Marshall family.
Well, the worst behaved children in any church are always the vicar's kids, so that was the same with me. My father was a kind of larger-than-life character. His idea of a summer holiday was to take us Bible smuggling behind the Iron Curtain. So every summer we used to load the Austin 1800, any of you old enough to remember that, one of British Leyland's single worst ever products, probably along with the Allegro. He'd pack this car up with Russian Bibles and go off into the USSR and smuggle Bibles in. I presume that's what everybody did, didn't it?
That's right. It's not quite Blackpool or Skegness, but you were yay high, and you 3 sisters, and all of you packed into the car, smuggling. Talk us through what happens at the checkpoint.
Oh yeah, I mean the rush. Well, different borders. Some were not as strict, but the border into the USSR, you could be there for 9 hours. They would just take the whole car to bits, and then stack everything up, and then get into some kind of haggling about what you could take in. So my father used to say, well, we need Russian Bibles because we're learning Russian. So they would say, well, how many Russian Bibles have you got? He'd say, 50. He'd say, well, that's too many. So Dad would say, well, about 25 or 30 or something. And he figured probably the rest got sent on, sold on the black market. But for him, I think it was more psychological for the people there. Often we go to a church and the pastor would be in the Gulag archipelago. This was in the early 70s. And outside the church, imagine we were here in a church, there would be the secret police, and they would just make a note of everybody coming into the church. And if you went to the church, you couldn't get a job, you couldn't get on in the party, you were discriminated against. So as a child, now later on as a teenager, the thing that occurred to me is, why on earth are these people doing this? There's every possible human reason not to believe in God. The whole of society is geared towards don't go to church, especially, they didn't mind if the babushkas, the 80-year-old ladies did it, but for the young people, why would you do that? And it occurred to me that the only possible reason was because it was actually true. Otherwise, you'd be kind of, humanly speaking, bonkers to put yourself through all that suffering and discrimination. So that made quite an impression on me as a teenager.
You as a teenager growing up in a Christian family, made you think there must be some truth. I know kind of you're somebody who reads very widely, has read very widely, and you're very concerned to kind of examine all the evidence for the claims of Christianity. Why are you so keen on evidence?
Well, Mark mentioned about hope, okay, and the thing that keeps me going is that I have hope beyond the grave. I have hope that there is something beyond the grave, that there is a person, Jesus Christ, but some of you may think, well, that's kind of wishful thinking. If I was in your shoes, Jeremy, I probably would find that a comforting thought. So the key question I suggest to you tonight, which you must consider, and that's up to you, I can't tell you what to think, is this. Not, is the Christian faith of hope beyond the grave helpful? Obviously it is. The alternative is kind of I take so many pills that it gives me indigestion, pardon me. But if you think of the Dawkinsite view, that we're just a bunch of genes, and if you've got bad DNA, which obviously I have, I can blame my parents for that, then it's just too bad. You're just going to shuffle off, and that's the end of it. Compared to the Christian one, that we're made for God, we're designed for God, God loves us, he cares for us. That's an obvious trade in favour of the Christian view, but that's not the key question. That's the second question. The first question, is it true? Because otherwise, just whistling in the dark. If we're walking down a dark street in London, we think we might get mugged. We whistle, don't we, to keep our... I don't know what you do, but anyway, that's what people do, isn't it? To keep their spirits up. But are we just, as Christians, whistling in the dark? No, I believe it with all my heart, it's true. And the reason I believe that there is hope beyond the grave is that, I'd like to quote Eddie Izzard, okay? Not the Gospels, Eddie Izzard, right? And he was recently, in the transvestite comedian, he's not a Christian, but recently he was interviewed in The Guardian, and he said, my whole life has been dominated by the loss of my mother to cancer when I think he was about 8 or 9. And he said, if only one person had once come back from beyond the grave to tell us there's something there. Well, that is the Christian claim. That is what Mark and I and other people, if you've been brought here, claim that, yes, that really happened. If you were there with a video camera on the morning of roughly the 6th of April, 33 AD, we don't know the exact date, but somewhere around there, you would have seen the stone being rolled away and Jesus coming back from the grave. And if you want to ask me why I believe that, we can do that in the questions. But the main reason is that I can think of no other alternative explanation that makes sense, especially that the disciples who were defeated, ran away, betrayed Jesus, within a few weeks were standing a few hundred yards away from where that miracle had happened, where Jesus had come back from the dead, telling people Jesus has risen. And more than that, many of them then paid for that claim with their lives. So why on earth would they have done that if it wasn't true? So it seems to me that's the only logical explanation, and that's the basis on which I'm a Christian. That I believe Jesus really did come back from the dead. Not as some kind of metaphorical idea, no, really physically there. And Jesus was seen by, probably the numbers, in the Bible, it says in one time he was seen by 500 people at once. This is not one or two people having a kind of apparition, or if only Jesus came back. No, this is a real thing where people saw him, they touched him. And also what's very convincing to me is that half of them didn't even believe he was alive. I mean, there's a story in the Bible, a great story about Thomas. You've all heard probably of doubting Thomas. Thomas wasn't there the first Sunday when Jesus came back from the dead. And he said to the others, no, I don't believe. No, he must be stupid. Dead people don't come back. And in fact, he said, unless I can put my fingers into the holes in his wrists, and my hand into his side where a spear went in, I will not believe. So maybe you're like Thomas. Maybe you come with doubts and questions. What about this? What about that? That's okay. God is so kind and compassionate. And Jesus then, the week later, appears to Thomas and he says, okay, Thomas, go ahead. There's my holes where the nails went in on the cross. Here's the hole in my side. Put your hand in and believe. Thomas then says, my Lord and my God. And Jesus then says something to him, you're blessed because you've seen it and you believe. But more blessed, and that's everybody since, who haven't seen but have still believed. So that's really what being a Christian is. It's believing that Jesus came back from the dead. It's believing that he's the Son of God, and it's trusting our life to him.
So tell me, let me kind of push you on that a little bit. Tell me why, given that you weren't there when Thomas saw the Lord, why do you believe it?
Yeah, because I think the eyewitness evidence is reliable, and I'd invite you to look at it for yourself. So people sometimes think that being a Christian is like a kind of leap in the dark. No, I mean, I'm a historian by training. No, it's factual, it's rational, it's evidential. And we have 4 eyewitness accounts of Jesus' life, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They were circulating orally within a few years of Jesus' death, and they were written down 20, 30 years later. There's a chain of transmission, which if you have questions you can ask me about, from when they were written, starting in about 50 with Mark, probably John was written in about 70, to the current day. There are something like 5,000 extant manuscripts of the Gospels. The oldest one of all places in Manchester in the John Rylands Library. You can go and see it. I've seen it. It's from about 100 AD. So within about 30 years of John writing his Gospel down, there's it's not the whole thing, obviously, it's a fragment in this library in Manchester. So there is an evidential chain that to me makes sense. And if the Christian claim is true, that there is life beyond the grave, that one day each of us will meet God, that Jesus really conquered death, then friends, it's worth investigating, even if it's for half an hour. And how do you do that? The friend who brought you along, just have a look at the evidence, kick the tires. God doesn't play hide and seek. In the Bible, God says, if you seek me, you will, with all your heart, you will surely find me. God wants to reach each one of us. He wants to rescue us from the mess we're in, the world, cancer, all these things. And he's given us evidence. So being a Christian is a logical, rational belief based on hard facts. Now, it's also more than that, because there were people in Jesus' disciples, who saw Jesus come back. They saw the evidence he'd come back from the dead, but that didn't make them it's more than just a kind of, yes, okay, he came back. It's also meeting and encountering the risen Lord Jesus. So that is also part of the Christian thing. One is the evidential basis, that it really happened, he really did rise from the dead. But the second one is we can actually know him now. Yes, and that's what being a Christian is. It's to know God and be reconciled to God through his Son.
And Jeremy, I've met some of your friends and former colleagues and clients and things who say that they've been massively intrigued by your Christian faith while you've been ill and have asked you what you believe and why you believe and so on. Lots of us, I guess, get tongue-tied when people ask us those kind of questions. What do you say? How do you sum up Christianity in a few sentences?
It's hope. Hope. Not sometimes we say, I hope the weather's going to be good tomorrow, or I hope Watford are going to win the Premier League, which, trust me, they won't. That's a kind of rather vague word, but the Christian hope means certainty. And if there's no truth in what I've been saying, then, friends, there is no hope. We might as well just eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. So the last person who spoke here was a man called Professor John Lennox, who's a professor of mathematics at Oxford, and he tells the following story. So he was on a train once coming back from a lecture in Cambridge, and opposite him was another eminent scientist from Cambridge, who he didn't know, but they were in the carriage together. And John was reading the Bible, and this man said to him, "You don't really believe that, do you?" He said, "Yeah, I do actually. Yeah, I do believe it's true." And he said, "Well, why does it appeal to you?" Because John said, "Well, it gives me hope, what I've just said." And then John asked the metallurgist, the scientist, he said, "Do you mind me asking, do you have any hope?" He said, "Oh, yeah, I guess we'll all kind of muddle through in the end." And John said, No, I don't mean that. I mean personal hope." The man looked at him and said, "No, none whatsoever." So the heart of the Christian message is hope. And I feel passionately that in the time I've got left, and I don't know how, last time I asked the oncologist, it's about a year, I don't know, but he's kind of given up, which is fine, I don't mind. I'd rather say I don't know than 3 months or something. Then that hope is so powerful. I want to share it with other people. It would be like, me not doing this would be like having a cure for cancer and not telling other people about it. I mean, how stupid would that be? No, Christians, being a Christian, friends, is not about that Mark or I have got everything together, or that we're good people, or that we're preaching morality. No, not at all. We're just sick people who have found a cure, and we want to share that cure.
I remember you said, I think in one of the books I'll mention later, you talk about having discovered that there's it's like being given a holiday to the Seychelles, but Heathrow is a bit of a mess, and you've got to go through the mess to get to the wonderful destination. As you look back, I mean, I guess lots of people today would say, life's pretty good. I'm not sick. Life's treating me well. I've got lots of friends and family that I love. What's the problem, Jeremy? I can see why Christianity for somebody who's sick would be useful, a crutch, but life's treating me pretty well at the moment.
Okay. Well, Benjamin Franklin famously said, you can avoid everything in life apart from death and taxes. Having worked for Credit Suisse in Switzerland, I can tell you that's not altogether true. Hoare's a different story, of course. So you can play your way around the tax system, but the death rate in this church tonight, friends, is 100%. So if any of you think you're immortal, you may want to check with your friendly physician afterwards. So, the question is more immediate for me, but it will come to each one of us. And our basic problem is not only death, it's also that our relationship with God is broken. And why is it broken? Because of the sin in the world. And if we just look at the Evening Standard, all those people being stabbed, but it's not only the sin of society, it's also our own sin. Each one of us, let's be honest, has done things that if the person sitting next to us knew, they would be horrified. And that sin, the wrong things in our life, that breaks our relationship with God. Now, the good news is that God didn't leave us in this mess. He didn't just take a piece of paper and that didn't work, throw it away, start again. No, and it's not also that God just sympathizes with us, but he actually came into the world and suffered. And he did that because he loves us, and he loves us even though we hated him. Here in his love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us. While we were Christ's enemies, while we were Christ's enemies, Christ died for us. So many of the people who nailed Jesus to the cross, within a few weeks, they were believing on him. And that is the Christian message, that there is a way back to God. This world is a mess, and death is terrible. And death it breaks human relationships, doesn't it? It shatters them. And yet there is hope beyond the grave. There is a way back to God, which is why Jesus came. He came to die. He came to reopen the way back to God, and all the things that we've done wrong. And I'm glad there is justice in the world, because if you look at, Jimmy Savile, he appears to get off scot-free. But no, it's not in the Bible, but it's true. The mills of God grind slowly, but they grind exceeding small. So friends, each one of us one day is going to have to give an account to God for everything we've ever done wrong in our life. But God has purposed a way that we can be made right with God, which is by Jesus' death on the cross. And he proves that by the resurrection. So the cross and the resurrection is two sides of the same coin.
So you believe it's true. You believe it gives hope. Just kind of moving from truth to what extent it works when the rubber hits the road. When you're confronted by cancer and death as a family, how's it helped?
Yeah, again, I don't want to make out that I'm some kind of super person. I'm not. It's nasty, it's unpleasant, it's painful being in cancer, and I wish I wasn't ill. I wish I was okay. Kind of obvious. But what it gives you then is that sense that God is with you. I mean, the Bible is packed full of promises, and these are available to everybody. So a promise that's in the Bible is, I will never leave you or forsake you. Look, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. Cancer is very lonely sometimes. You're sitting there, sometimes in the hospital for hours at a time. You can't move because you're wired up to all this kind of chemical work, so you're in radiotherapy or whatever. And I just feel powerfully then the presence of God. Yeah, not in some, I've never seen anything. I just feel he's with me and he holds me. And that's amazing. That's an amazing thing to have. And that's not because I'm some kind of spiritual person or something. No, that's available. It's nothing to do with me. It's about him. So the presence of God is not just about him doing something for us. It's about him also coming to live with us and be with us and eventually take us to be with him. So the Christian faith is not a system of rules or religious kind of order. No, it's knowing a person. It's knowing Jesus Christ, who is, Christians believe, 100% God and 100% human, which is amazing because he's kind of a bridge then between God and us. The Bible says no one can see God at any time. God made the whole universe and everything in it. Think how big the universe is. It's just mind-blowing how big it is. God made that. And in that sense, we can't really know God because he's so big, but we can know that he came in the second person of the Trinity, Jesus Christ, and walked the dusty streets of Palestine 2,000 years ago, and we can know him now too.
Any particular sayings of Jesus or episodes in Jesus' life that over the last 5 years have become more and more precious to you?
Yeah, I mean, an obvious one is Lazarus, which is I guess a fairly well-known story. So Jesus' friend Lazarus, he's sick. Jesus doesn't go and heal him. In fact, he lets Lazarus die. And his disciples are a bit nonplussed. And Jesus says, no, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, by which he meant he died. So there's a great comfort there that we're still, if we're in Christ, we're still just as much Jesus' friends in the grave as we are at the table. And Jesus says, I'm letting Lazarus die because I want you to see God's glory. So when he goes there, Lazarus has two sisters. And one of them says, if you were here, you could have saved my brother. That's Martha, her name is. Jesus says, if you believe. Jesus says, well, I believe he will come back from the dead at the last thing. Jesus says, no, I am the resurrection and the life. I am the resurrection and the life. That is another promise of Jesus. I am the resurrection and life. Christianity is personal. It's about knowing God, and it's about believing. Belief is not just an intellectual assent, it's a trust. So he says to Martha, okay, do you believe? So then they go off to the tomb, and he says, okay, roll back the stone. And Martha, and this is kind of detail that to me is so convincing that it's true, says, you must be joking, he's going to stink. He's been in there for 4 days. Jesus says, just believe. And that's a bit like Thomas. You see, Jesus invites us to come as we are. Bring all your doubts, bring all your questions, bad smells, I don't believe, anything, it doesn't matter. Come. So they roll back the stone, and Jesus then says, Lazarus, come out. Somebody once asked the question, well, why did Jesus say Lazarus? Because it was a cemetery in case they all came out. So such is the divine power. Out comes Lazarus, all wrapped up like a mummy, kind of waddling out. And Jesus says, okay, take the grave clothes off and let him go. So that is the power of Jesus Christ, to call someone back from the dead who'd been dead for 4 days. And there's hundreds of people watching it. This wasn't done in a corner. This wasn't some kind of, conjuring trick. No, this was a public miracle, which even Jesus' opponents couldn't deny happened. There were people who hated Jesus because a few weeks later they were going to kill him. But none of them said, no, that didn't happen. They said, oh, it did happen, and it proves that he's from the devil. So that kind of story, that reality of Christ, that power over death, that's great to believe that's true.
Jeremy, I know that we're going to come to a break in a moment. Last question before we do that. One of the things you've most enjoyed over the last 5 years, despite all the treatments and sickness and pain, has been that you've had the opportunity, I know, with many friends, former colleagues and so on, to give them a kind of guided walk through a gospel like John or Luke or something like that. Many of us love to do that here at Christ Church. Tell us how you do it and how your friends find the experience.
Yeah, so it's in line with what I said, that Christianity is evidence-based. So I say to pretty much all my friends, do you fancy having a chat about the Bible? Look at it. If give me half an hour, which you've kindly given me this evening. Thank you, I appreciate that. And if you think it's a load of rubbish, fine. But if maybe you think, well, maybe there is something in it, then kick the tires. And what we do is we just sit down in Starbucks, other coffee shops are available, and we just have a chat. So there's a little, John's Gospel with some notes. They have a copy, I have a copy of the same thing. I just say, please read, if you know John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And read it to yourself, and the notes, have you got any questions? And what happens is, not every, I have to cut back when I'm ill with chemo, but when I'm not doing chemo, I have about 15 people I do it with, CEOs in the city, different people. And a number of people came to faith because as they read God's word, the Jesus Christ steps off the page. So it doesn't become it starts as a kind of academic, interesting, and I encourage people to ask questions, what about this, what about that, does that make sense, or how do we know that's true? But for many of them, somehow it's like a hand coming out of the Bible to say, yeah, I'm here. And then they meet Jesus Christ. So if you're thinking, well, maybe it's worth investigating, just sit down with a Christian friend, not now, but over a coffee or something, and just have a look. It's so you're going to kick yourself one day that offer was there, and the evidence is compelling. That's why I'm a Christian, because I believe it's true.
Jeremy, thank you so much for the time. The drinks are going to be served now. Food will be brought to you in your pews. Why not take the opportunity to turn to somebody sitting around you and try and come up with a question between you that you can ask Jeremy after the break. We've got loads of questions here, and thank you very much for them, and more still coming. Great. Jeremy, a question about what the doctors are saying to you. Is it helpful for doctors to give you an idea of you've only got X number of months left? And what have you found helpful, unhelpful when friends or family try to sympathise with you?
That's a good question.
And I think the subtext is, i.e., how can we support friends facing death?
Yeah. Well, to take the second one first, I think I feel bad about colleagues of mine where you just don't know what to say to people when they're facing cancer. I'm talking 10, 15 years ago. And as I said, it can be quite lonely. So just to try and just to say I'm really sorry. That's a good thing to say. What doesn't help is to say something like, and I have a miracle cure. If you eat radishes for the next 6 months, you'll be fine. You wouldn't believe how many people after events like this come up to me and tell some kind of home-made story about, actually I quite like radishes, but I don't think they cure you from cancer. So, I would say if you've got people in your family, friends with cancer, don't worry if you say the wrong thing. And little and often is the bit. Just like, for example, my cousin's wife, just on the way here, sent me a nice text. She's a lawyer in the city, and just said, I was thinking about you and hope everything went well at the Marsden on Monday. That's fine. I don't then feel I need to send a long reply. But just those little and often communications is really nice. And also thinking about the other people in the family. Some of you know that. So Jeanette sometimes feels like, well, what about me? I mean, in a way, it's kind of worse for the family member who's fine. So just also, is there anything I can do to help? Practical help is also good. Hoare's Bank were very kind and sent me all kinds of nice food, which was great when after you go through an operation, you really can't eat many things. So that's just those little practical things are really helpful. With the doctor, I guess I just wanted the truth, really. Some people don't ask, but I mean, Robin, my oncologist, who's great at the Marsden, he's kind of like my best friend now. Sometimes I feel I'm seeing him every day. So, you build a relationship, and I would like to know, even though it turned out to be wrong. I think it's better to just face up to reality if you can. So I'm glad I did ask him, and I do sometimes ask him now as well. He's like, I don't know. So that's okay.
You mentioned the family and people being sensitive and helpful for them. A number of questions here about how your family have responded.
Yeah, sure.
How are they coping with your illness? Has your belief helped them find hope? How have your family and wife in particular felt about you spending lots of time with other people, not them, spreading your faith in these last precious moments? And does your wife and do your children share your strong hope? Yeah,
I mean, they have to speak for themselves, and part of being a Christian is we can't impose our beliefs on anyone. But Jeanette and our 3 children do have a Christian faith. Some would have probably more doubts and questions than others, but that's okay. The key thing is, if you like to kind of get on the train, to the Lord, how we get on the train. Some people jump on it with great enthusiasm, others are kind of more reluctant. That doesn't matter so much. I guess, the hard thing, it is hard for them. And they have to decide for themselves. I can't impose my beliefs on them. So they have to figure out, is what Dad says actually true? You can also, cancer has also its kind of funny side as well. I mean, Nat, our older son, doesn't mind me telling this story, so it's one of my favourites. So the first time I had cancer 5 years ago, Nat, who was then like 17, I think, had a Taiwanese pen pal, exchange student with him. And he was staying, and Nat was sort of very attentive to him. And I couldn't get Nat away from this guy, Jim, to tell him. So in the end, in desperation, I said, "Oh, Nat, I've got a problem with my iPad. Could you come next door and give me a hand?" So I got him into another room. I said, "Nat, I've got something to tell you. I'm afraid I've got cancer, blah, 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 blah." Went on for 3 or 4 minutes, told him. I said, "Have you got any questions?" He said, "So there's nothing wrong with your iPad then?" That was okay, yeah.
Somebody's asked, said, "Thank you very much for sharing your story with such honesty. Your hope and ability to deal with your difficult situation is rooted in your Christian faith." And a couple of questions from people who aren't Christians, saying, one a Jewish person saying, "Can you give me any hope?" using your words. How would you deal with your cancer without Christian faith? And how would you advise a non-Christian who had the same diagnosis?
Yeah. Well, first of all, to our Jewish friend here, I'm so appreciative. I love Jewish people. In fact, I was on the board of a PLC where I was the token Gentile, which was a great experience. The company was basically founded in Tel Aviv, and it's a kind of technology company. Long story how I ended up on it, but that friends are our older brothers and sisters, which is why anti-Semitism, which is a curse of the so-called Christendom, is just the most dreadful and appalling thing. And what I would say to someone who's here, who's Jewish, is that the promises of God are for Jews and Christians. And there is a difference there. And the difference is that Christians believe that Jesus is the Messiah. But Paul in Romans, Paul wasn't one of Jesus' 12 disciples. He was probably the most influential thinker apart from Jesus, an amazing man who had this famous road to Damascus experience where he met the risen Lord. He said he went around the Roman world and planted churches everywhere. Eventually was martyred for his faith. And obviously was a Jew. And in fact, all the early Christians were Jewish, which again is why anti-Semitism is so crazy. Paul said, there will be a rejoining. He said, it's like a graft. So us Gentiles, we're like the stock grafted into the trunk. And eventually there will be a reconciliation. So Christians believe that Jewish friends are our older brothers and sisters, and we would invite you to consider politely our claim that Jesus is the Messiah. If you're here as a non-Christian, an atheist, agnostic, I'm so appreciative of you coming and listening. Being a Christian is not about a kind of religious system, as I tried to explain. Not that somehow we're saying you've got to, do this or do that or conform to something other. No, it's about meeting God and knowing him. And that's available to everybody. The offer of the Christian message is for anyone. Jew, Gentile, man, woman, slave, free. That was one of the amazing things in the early church, was that all these disparate people came together and they formed one common body. So the Christian claim is that Jesus is the Son of God, and if you're, for example, a Muslim, that's a hard thing to understand. And if you're an atheist, you think, well, there is no God in the first place. But our suggestion is that you can know that God. And how do we know him? We know him because he speaks to us. I was chatting to someone who said that they're searching. Well, that's right. And God, the good news is, friends, not that we're looking for God, but that God's looking for us. That God is looking for us. That he's looking for each one of you. And he invites you to come. Come. That's what he says. Come and believe in me. It doesn't matter what your background is. If you come from a very devoutly Christian family, an atheist, Jewish, agnostic, come. And to re-quote what I said before, God's promise, which is in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Scriptures, is this. It's in Jeremiah, my namesake. If you seek me with all your heart, you will surely find me.
Jeremy, a few quick fire-ish questions, if I can, just for the time. Is there any hope for people, you talked about people from different faiths and no faith. Is there any hope for people who've never heard about Jesus?
Yeah, look, God's mercy, we have to leave that to God. So if there's somebody in the Amazonian rainforest 4,000 years ago, I don't know. You know, that the Bible says that the heavens proclaim the glory of God. So there may be, I don't know. Yeah, who knows? I'll leave that to God to decide. But what I can say is that each of us here, you've heard, even in their rather incompetent and bumbling way, the Christian message. So whatever happens to the person in 2000 BC,
somebody said, e.g. babies. What about babies?
Well, you're the theological expert. I would say that, most Christians believe that people who die in infancy, which, by the way, was up until recently, up until 150 years ago, most people, can go beyond the age of 5, would be with the Lord. Yeah, absolutely. So that's been the Orthodox Christian belief all down the ages. Yeah.
And the one thing we discovered, Jeremy, as we read from Genesis all the way through to Revelation, is that God always does the right thing. He's loving, he's patient, he's faithful. We can trust God with anybody, can't we? Yeah. He'll always do the right thing.
Yeah, and that there's both a comfort and a warning in that, because God is a just God and justice will be done. But that also means that things that we've done that we think are buried, that, nobody knows about, God sees them. God sees everything. And one day we will meet him face to face. And one day, God may say to you, well, you remember whenever it was, the 8th of November 2018, well, you heard about my son then. So God doesn't, again, because of the previous question, what about people who never heard? I don't know. But we have heard.
Somebody's asked a good question. How would you feel if your hope turns out to be misplaced?
Well, I guess I won't find out. If there's nothing there, then there's nothing there. That's, by the way, Pascal's wager if you're into mathematics. So, no, if I'm wrong, then that's it. It's just oblivion for all of us. But I don't think I'm wrong. In fact, I'm convinced that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. And I would urge you to place your hope and your trust on that.
Why did God set up such a complex and diverse system, just one way to get hope?
That's a very interesting question. Do you think it's the question mark, the diverse system of the world as it is, or the kind of way to God?
I think probably the way to God.
Okay. If it's come across as complex, then I've done a pretty bad job, and you can fire me, Mark, because it couldn't be simpler. The heart of the Christian message is Jesus, Yeshua, means Saviour. So that is why God came into the world in human form, to save us, to rescue us from cancer, from sin, from suffering. And he came in and died for us. And why did he do that? Because he loved us. That is the Christian message in a nutshell. Now, there are many other things, and in the Hebrew Scriptures, in Deuteronomy, Moses says, the secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the revealed things are for us and for our children. So there are many things about, if we can understand God, friends, we haven't understood him. Just to give you some idea of how big the universe is, for every grain of sand on every beach in the whole of the earth, which is obviously trillions and trillions of grains of sand, in the known universe, there are 2 stars for every grain of sand. That is how big the universe is. It's staggeringly big. You think of one big beach in England, how many grains of sand? Every grain of sand, 2 stars. And yet the Christian claim is that God who made the cosmos and everything, he is knowable because he came into the world as a human being. So the secret things we can't know, but what we can know is the person of Jesus Christ.
Last 2 questions. If God loves us, why are we still suffering? Why does Jesus' death matter?
The first one is a very profound question. By the way, the Bible doesn't answer some questions. So as to where suffering and evil comes from, the Bible doesn't tell us. It's the oldest book in the Bible is the book of Job, a very mysterious book. Nobody knows who wrote it. It's not written about a Jew. It's written about a man who's in what's now Iraq. And Job, God allows all this terrible stuff to come into his life. You've probably heard of Job's comforters, who are three friends who come and comfort Job. They're actually worse than useless. And they're incredibly, if you want an example of what not to say to people in suffering, go and read the book of Job. And Job is angry with God. He's very angry. He rages with God. Why? Why is this happening to me? And he says, it's not fair. And at the end of the book, God appears to Job in a storm. And God asks him 78 questions. He doesn't answer. You think you're going to get some tremendous, what's called a theophany, which is like a realization or a kind of declare. God is going to give him some kind of philosophical lecture. No, he doesn't. He doesn't do it at all. He just says, look, Job, I'm God and you're not. Yeah, it's a tough answer.
So why does Jesus' death matter?
Yeah, so Job is looking for some way to relate to God because he feels God is so other and I can't. And he keeps saying, if only I had a friend, if only I had an advocate, if only I had a mediator, and if only I had, in fact, he says famously, as in the Messiah, I know that my Redeemer lives and on the last day will stand on the earth, or it can mean on my grave. So Job doesn't know what he's looking for really, but he's got this longing for someone who can be a bridge, be a mediator between him and God. And that's what Jesus' death is about. It's about reopening the way to God, which is blocked by our sin. Jesus on the cross takes our sin, all the things that we've done wrong, and says, that's mine. And that makes us, if we believe and trust in him, right with God, reconciled with God. All the things we've done, all the crap, pardon my language, and other things we've done in our lives, God removes it. God says in the Psalms, as far as the east is from the west, so far is your sin removed if you trust in me. So that's what Jesus' death is about. It's a way of bringing us to reconciliation, to being back to God, to bring us home. Maybe this is a good place to finish. I believe when I die, whenever it is, then I'm going home to be with God who made me and who loves me. And that's the invitation. Come home to God. Don't wander off. Don't wander off in the darkness. Come home. Come home to God. Get right with God.
Jeremy, on our behalf, I want to thank you very much for giving up the time, not least in a week where you've been having chemo and you'd probably much rather be at home watching old footage of Watford football matches or something like that. Thank you very much for giving the time. Thank you for coming and for giving the time to think about these big issues. There's no need to rush off. Do stay around, have something to drink, continue those conversations. Feel free to come and chat to Jeremy. So thank you very much for coming, and let's once again say thanks to Jeremy.